Hello, my name is Tolg and I exist, therefore I think too much. I am recording from a different room because life has been stressful and stuff happens. So that's a thing that happened. And I'm going to read from Fred's Beyond Good and Evil. I am on chapter 3, The Religious Mood, point 62. I rant when I read. This is not a perfect read-through. I'm highly opinionated, and I cuss when I talk. If that does not appeal to you, you are welcome to change your mind or find something that does appeal to you. The world is yours to explore. And yep. So it starts off. To be sure to make also the bad counter-reckoning against such religions, and to bring to light their secret dangers. The cost is always excessive and terrible when religions do not operate as an educational and disciplinary medium in the hands of the philosopher. They have to operate that way through the philosopher's understanding of the religion. If the philosopher does not address religion in the understanding of its disciplinary and educational measures, then the philosopher becomes dangerous in its interpretation and delivery of said interpretation towards religions. That's how I understood that. And in discussing disciplinary medium of any religion, then are we straight up admitting at this point that religion is a militaristic tool as a means of controlling the mass populace? But rule voluntarily and paramountly, when they wish to be the final end, and not a means along with other means. Not a means to an end? But the end in and of itself? The religion is the end? Oh. The cost is always excessive and terrible when religions do not operate as an educational and disciplinary medium, but rule voluntarily and paramountly when they wish to be the final end and not a means along with other means. Oh. So Nietzsche does hate modern-day Christianity and would absolutely hate white Christian nationalism going on currently in the U.S. Having been raised in... what was I raised in? Having experienced for 5 to 7 years evangelicalism. Yeah, having been raised in a church that was more evangelical than not, but was definitely non-denominational. And I keep saying raised, it's just easy to say that, I guess. I was discussing it recently, and I am more than sure that without the fear of death, evangelicalism and megachurches would not have as much popularity. There is a means by which one respects things or shows reverence, rather, towards things, and I think fear is the bastardization of that reverence, where you can revere and understand a subject. Fear drives you to aim to control it instead. If you control it, then it will not have the terrible effect that you're afraid of it having on you. And, I think that it is a very hush-hush, but not quite readily understood and background idea to modern-day religion that without man there would be no God. that if men up and quit praising God, it would not exist. And therein, there is this slight notion that man owns God in that respect. And it's not something anyone actually thinks about. But I feel like man acts like that is a sentiment all the same. That is where the pride comes from when one participates in a religion. Humankind has a tendency to not appreciate the fact that they are themselves a species of animal existing on an earth. And in participation of a religion promotes itself to a near demigod level, just one above animal and just underneath God. A sentiment that the control is in their hands, a means to steer a river as they like, without appreciation for the natural flow of things, when they wish to be the final end and not a means along with other means, when those participating in or expounding on a religion demand that said religion is the end-all be-all, when they participate in praying for the end brought about through that practice in religion as well, rather than, God being a creator and being a creationist religion, just allowing God to create and do at its own time what it will, putting it in the hands of humanity to steer the river, to steer the flow of time, to steer and attempt to manage all that will come from the religious doctrine. Rather than understanding that, not only is their participation in that religion just a means, just a part of civilization, but there are other parts, working parts. And especially if you believe in an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God, that there are many working parts to civilization, and your religion is not the end-all, be-all, finite, understanding of an infinite God. Among men, as among all other animals, there is a surplus of defective, diseased, degenerating, infirm, and necessarily suffering individuals. Amen. The successful cases among men also are always the exception, and in view of the fact that man is the animal not yet properly adapted to his environment, the rare exception. That's interesting because man continues to develop an environment that man then suffers from. It's been mentioned a lot, especially for how the U.S. is currently going, but the utopia rat experiment where everything was provided, everything that could ever be wanted was had. Then society was built in these rats. There were like 4 main rats that rose to the zenith, and then they died, and it's normally focusing on the male rats in the experiment. And after those 4 male rats that had promoted themselves to the zenith of population died, the male rats that came after preened themselves to be very beautiful rats and were not chosen for procreation, leading to the death of the entire civilization of these rats in this utopic study. And in having said that, and also in having just given a rant about, understanding that mankind is its own species of animal on this earth alongside other species of animals, I feel like continuing to attempt to understand humankind by an experiment run on animals, especially animals in confinement, is a really sad and stunted form of study, because different species understand things differently point blank period. Like dogs have less cones in their eyes to be able to perceive reality as we do. I can't say much about how other animals understand things because, I'm not another animal. I am human. So I'm limited in that respect, but the bare minimum, I can understand different cones in different species' eyes, and they're in different abilities to perceive the light spectrum. And how that could steer an animal's understanding of reality. And, crows, I think. Was it crows or blackbirds? Or ravens? One of the three have been found to create cults of religions themselves. And they're finding, forms of pattern in other animals that would indicate some ideation of reverence for the natural flow of life, which in our species is seen as a religious ideation. And so, without first-hand experience, I can't say that it isn't a spiritual revelation on these other species' part. But oh right, okay. So rat utopia. Getting back to it. Rats are not humans. And in my understanding of humankind and its understanding of spiritual ideation, there is that one sentiment of yin and yang, or embodying both masculine traits and feminine traits in any gender or identity of any human animal on the earth. And I think that is the healthiest way to go about it, rather than identifying yourself permanently as only capable of a finite sentiment of aspects in your person, that the sentiment of masculinity is to conquer and war, and in that respect protect. Because as I've understood it, it's a very masculine ideation to approach life very much like Nietzsche, in a means of conquering, by which I don't intend to say that conquering is a physical tool, more than it's a tool utilized to own something. So ideologically, philosophically, or theoretically, or physically. However one comes about the understanding that they have owned something, the attempt is to own it. And then after you own it, presumably you create from that. Wherein the feminine is provision, as it's been understood in society. But in matrilineal-led societies, not only is it provision, but it is nurture and leadership. And so if you take this masculine conquer, you pair it with protection and provision, and then you understand that the feminine is provision as well, and nurture and leadership, and you combine both the feminine and the masculine in any individual. Even in a utopic society, one would be able to have this zenith met, and they would then be able to expound. When all the resources are had, they would be able to expound their growth on the having already conquered aspect of it, moving into the feminine aspect of it, of leading into growth, evolving into and forcing evolution on surroundings as well, which one would not be able to do in a means of confinement. So seeing what could grow from what has been conquered through continuous provision and nurture. rather than I have conquered, now I neglect. But we're still, going back to it, sorry. The higher the type a man represents, the greater is the improbability that he will succeed. The accidental, the law of irrationality in the general constitution of mankind manifests itself most terribly in its destructive effect on the higher orders of men, the conditions of whose lives are delicate, diverse, and difficult to determine. Because of subjectivity, I assume. What, then, is the attitude of the two greatest religions above mentioned to the surplus of failures in life? That was a pretty hefty struggle. I remember trying to reason out, if God is perfect, then why does evil exist? At which point I think most people just say, fuck it, I don't know, it's God's plan, and give up trying to explain that aspect of it. But my understanding is that perfection is had in imperfection. Especially when one understands God as infinite. The only growth that could be had, the only evolution that could be had, is if there is first a platform of imperfection. And a goal of perfection therein would be suitable, with understanding that it will never be met, especially in appreciation of the infinite being God. So in understanding that alone, one can continue to raise the expectations of what evil is doing. So right now, what we understand evil to be doing is on the level of, pay-per-view red rooms, abducting people, paying someone to abduct them, and then paying per the view of what someone does to torture them in back rooms. And, imaginations run wild at that, but evolve from there. Evil could become what it was biblically, just envying what your neighbor had. Misusing your resources. Being incapable of paying respect to the law. The bare fucking minimum of evil right now. Every time you evolve, you can raise expectations of your surroundings. And I think mankind continues to put the focus and strive towards the zenith, rather than understanding you don't get to the top of the mountain without appreciating that you're first at the bottom of it. Tunnel vision keeps you from understanding the ability to pull from your surroundings and survive therein. It keeps you in a delusional state. I don't know if I'm the only one who's had these nightmares. And so sure that I'm not. But you'll be running, and whatever you're running towards continues to feel further and further away, and you feel like everything you're doing is underwater. Like everything is so much more effort to do. And even if your emotions and everything is in the right way, your emotions of your arms and legs, the struggle is that it will never be enough. That's what tunnel vision towards the zenith gets you, versus if you just appreciate where you're at and start climbing using, the lifts, the steps, the rocks in your path. It's less of a fucking struggle. Keep perfection as a goal, but don't keep your focus there. And that rant comes from who's the zenith of men, the conditions of whose lives are delicate, diverse, and difficult to determine. And how do the greatest religions above mentioned understand the failures in life? Most people, if they're focused on a perfect God, a perfect death, a perfect end to everything, they don't want to have to understand their surroundings, and therein nothing will ever get better. It's a lack of accountability and a lack of responsibility. You pray for heaven on earth, but you can't correct the hell that's been created by humankind. You aim to introduce all of what is perfect to this shithole. And I say shithole on the supposition that, you're praying for something better, not on the supposition that God, your creator, gave you a place to live after creating it. That this perfect being would give you something that you do not deserve. And I mean that on saying that perfection has only had an imperfections, and as someone who has gone through some bullshit, that I would not readily turn around and say, yeah, fuck you, you deserve that to people. I mean it that when I did go through this shit, it is still a lesson that I can pull away from, and I can be grateful that I am not as ignorant as I once was, not as naive as I used to be, and I can be grateful that that is at least something that I can use as a building block to get to the top of the mountain. I don't mean deserved as, pain is, this level of pain especially is ultimately necessary, but I definitely have always had an issue with humanity disregarding the earth and its resources in an attempt to, honor skyscrapers, the Tower of Babel. Peter Thiel. They endeavor to preserve and keep alive whatever can be preserved. In fact, as the religions for sufferers, they take the part of these upon principle. They are always in favor of those who suffer from life as from a disease, and they would fain treat every other experience of life as false and impossible. Again, holding a zenith as perfection and feeling like you're never going to be able to reach the end of the hall in a nightmare. However highly we may esteem this indulgent and preservative care, inasmuch as in applying to others it is applied and applies also to the highest and unusually the most suffering type of man, the hitherto paramount religions, to give a general appreciation of them, are among the principal causes which have kept the type of man upon a lower level. They have preserved too much that which should have perished. I'm sorry, I read that and I didn't pay attention to it. Merp, merp. They have preserved too much that which should have perished. If you focus on the top of the mountain, the evolution for the low parts of the mountain can't be had. You can't move up a step because I guess you give up before you try. So if you're ideologically holding standards as perfection and above yourself, then it is far easier to say, I am human and of the flesh. God forgive me, and then the whole ideation of Jesus dying on the cross and taking every sin onto itself when it died. And I say it because of the concept of Jesus being so fucking convoluted in Christianity. You praise it like a god, but you understand it as a man. Pick a lane. Yeah, if you only see Jesus as a means by which you can evade paying the price for your own sins, then what point is there to take a step up towards any amount of perfection? Why should you have to evolve? One has to thank them for invaluable services, and who is sufficiently rich in gratitude not to feel poor at the contemplation of all that the spiritual men of Christianity have done for Europe hitherto. Beautiful architecture, but it wasn't always Christian men that made the architecture, just Christian men that praised in the architecture. But when they had given comfort to the sufferers, courage to the oppressed and despairing, a staff and support to the helpless, and when they had allured from society into convents and spiritual penitentiaries the broken-hearted and distracted, what else had they to do in order to work systematically in that fashion, and with a good conscience? for the preservation of all the sick and suffering, which means, in deed and in truth, to work for the deterioration of the European race. That's interesting. To promote themselves to a point of, I am perfect and I can give to those that are imperfect. You teach a man to fish, he fishes for a day. No, you give a man fish, he eats for a day. You teach a man to fish, he eats for life. Something like that. I'm so good at quotes. And that is proof. And so if you're just constantly giving man fish, you feel egotistically better about yourself because you're giving, but you've not taught man how to fish for itself. So you're just ruining their ability to be alive and their capacity to give back. And therein, I normally say, are you actually helping someone, or are you just feeding your own ego when you say, I've helped so many people? If your help is granted with the same gift of a burden onto the person that you're giving something to, then you're not helping them. You're giving them a burden. If it's a debt that they owe you, you're giving them a burden. You're not giving them help. And then past that, are you truly giving them help? Or are you giving them what they perceive to be help? If someone's in a situation of needing help, more often than not saying it doesn't happen that they know what they need, but more often than not, the individual that got themselves into the situation of needing help got themselves there because they did not know what they actually needed to not be there. And so giving this individual something to survive the next day, or saying, I'll do for you what you're asking for, may not actually be helpful to the individual. In reference to, if you don't have knowledge of something, how do you know what to ask for? How do you know what to do? If you don't know that something exists, how do you know that to work towards it, or to want it, or to know enough about it to understand you need it? So what is truly helpful versus what are you doing that makes you think you're being helpful? Rather, what are you doing to feed your ego? I'm okay today, by the way. My brain's okay. That was sarcasm. Sorry. To reverse all estimates of value, that is what they had to do. Actually teach people. So there's this other rant that I'll go on now. Planned obsolescence. An idea introduced to, I think, the initial introduction, at least as far as I understood it, was watches, planned obsolescence, so that those who are poor can have access to things that they may need in life, even if they have to put down more money in the long run to keep them, rather than saving up for them and going without in the meantime. But planned obsolescence ended up evolving from just watches, things that one would need to understand the time of day if they weren't trying to go by, these large fucking clock towers that chime every hour and then take a random guess past that. Into things like education. So having both parents needing to work to financially support the household and the needs of everybody within the household, then, also simultaneously in the US, needing your children to be signed up to an educational program, homeschool, Sylvan learning, or boarding school, private school, or public school. And then on top of that, childcare having a monopoly on the prices puts everybody in a position where there is a large separation between parents and children. And then the stupefaction of education within the U.S., the planned obsolescence of education in the U.S., where it breaks down over time in that the lack of finite detail or intricate details in beginning education would start to show cracks in later education. Not teaching letters to children in preschool in first and second grade, evolving into not being able to read or write in fifth and sixth grade now. And then again, revisiting the fact that parents are having to work, both parents are having to work to keep the house financially afloat, especially with raising property prices in the U.S. Thank you, BlackRock. I.e., thank you, Vanguard. Puts everybody into a position where they're no longer capable of going over the education of their children when they're at home, going over morals and ethics, understanding how to provide emotionally or intellectually for the children that are gone from the parents 8 hours a day. And then relying heavily on outside sources to provide all of that, where these outside sources are underpaid in one respect where education is concerned, and overpaid in another respect where just generalized care is concerned. I guess it just goes hand in hand with lack of evolutionary process, putting everybody into a continuous position of needing help and not able to understand what help is needed, and then not being able to grow past what they do not have. So it creates a system of further dependence on an overarching structure like governance and supply from governance. So in reference to reverse all estimates of value, that is what they had to do. It's what's been done. The U.S. specifically has misunderstood what value actually is, continuing to pay into the system that was set up, especially where monetary prices would have one deduce that something that is more expensive means that it is of better quality, rather than that, someone just signed their name onto it. And you can scale that down to education, where, if it has a big brand name on it, the education must be better, rather than understanding that quality education was historically buffered with one being able to involve themselves with the education of their child at home, as well as the child being involved in education at school. Both happening simultaneously. Where educating a child at home meant that it didn't necessarily matter how shit the education was at school, because the education or the child would have had a platform by which they could have taught themselves when they were not being given to. And so to reverse all estimates of value is all systems, all valued systems in the U.S. have been put into reverse of function, and value itself has been misunderstood. Where value is an honest estimation of the worth of something, where people say nothing in life is free, the ability to honestly understand what something costs and if one can afford that cost in the long run. So reversing all estimates of value instead of feeding into the deterioration of an entire race or, country. Would be building community, understanding how to barter and trade, and forcing people to be able to be held accountable to their own actions, especially when they refuse to hold themselves accountable. Like the fact that childcare costs, the amount of a car loan, or rent is being raised to absurd fucking prices, more expensive than mortgages, and people who are paying mortgages are now having to sell their house to meet the demand. Holding people accountable where they refuse to hold themselves accountable. Don't necessarily eat the rich, but definitely force them to pay their taxes, and maybe reverse the effect of a 1990s, 2000s decision where companies can be held liable as entities unto themselves. So, in a court of law, ethics in business do not need to be upheld because there is no price to be paid when a corporation is an entity, ruled as an entity unto itself, and the thing that ends up needing to pay the price for a wrongdoing is something that can be done away with and recreated under a different name, because the penalty would be monetary, and the monetary value is in shareholders and stock prices and liquid assets. Hold things and people accountable where they refuse to hold themselves accountable. And to shatter the strong, to spoil great hopes, to cast suspicion on the delight in beauty, to break down everything autonomous, manly, conquering, and imperious, all instincts which are natural to the highest and most successful type of man, into uncertainty, distress of conscience, and self-destruction, forsooth, to invert all love of the earthly and of supremacy over the earth, into hatred of the earth and earthly things, exactly what, Christianity has taught people to do. And I cannot turn the page. That is the task the church imposed on itself. Goddamn right. And was obliged to impose until, according to its standard of value, unworldliness, unsensuousness, and higher man fused into one sentiment. It's what makes it a good tool to lead people, or good tool, maybe not, but convenient, lazy fucking tool to lead people. And I am not shitting on any god that exists. I am absolutely shitting on religion. If one could observe the strangely painful, equally coarse and refined comedy of European Christianity with the derisive and impartial eye of an Epicurean god, I should think one would never cease marveling and laughing. Does it not actually seem that some single will has ruled over Europe for 18 centuries in order to make a sublime abortion of man? He, however, who, with opposite requirements, no longer European, misread that one, no longer Epicurean, and with some divine hammer in his hand, could approach this almost voluntary degeneration and stunting of mankind as exemplified in the European Christian, Pascal for instance, would he not have to cry aloud with rage, pity, and horror, "O you bunglers, presumptuous hands!" I'm so good at reading right now. "O you bunglers, presumptuous, pitiful bunglers, what have you done? Was that a work for your hands? How you have hacked and botched my finest stone. What have you presumed to do? I should say that Christianity has hitherto been the most portentous of presumptions." Especially in that Christianity is named Christianity on the premise that it follows Christ's teachings. where Christ itself, himself, could be in modern day considered to be, what did I say? A communist hippie. Wanting separation of church from banks and law from religion. And I know that people say, well, you hung out with the least of us. No, the understanding was what you do to the least of us, you do unto me. Jesus also said, do not praise me as God, for I am man. What I do, you are capable of doing. This should be held as a goal for you to do. Jesus also admonished the church and said, you revere this as a holy day, which means that you don't make yourself of service to those who are in need of help because you revere yourself as more important. Called out the banking system within the church for causing a scandal of forcing those who are poor to get the least of the burnt sacrifices, worst quality of burnt sacrifices to the gods, condemning them in that practice to poor outcome of said sacrifice for higher prices than those that, grease the wheels of those that you owe a debt to. So general practices that are shared in networking in modern day society in the US. You know someone, you get in good with them. So generally, everything that Christ taught is currently what modern day Christianity does not follow. With the sentiment of tithing being give, 10%, 12%, 15% of your paycheck. Tithing is a sentiment of what you can give based on your relationship with God and what God would have you do as a means of, in your capacity with what you have available for you to use tool-wise, what you could do to help those around you. It has fuck all to do with money. It has everything to do with you being of service, being a fucking hippie. Men not great enough nor hard enough to be entitled as artists to take part in fashioning man. Men not sufficiently strong and far-sighted to allow, with sublime self-constraint, the obvious law of the thousandfold failures and perishings to prevail. Men not sufficiently noble to see the radically different grades of rank and intervals of rank that separate man from man. Yeah, Nietzsche upheld or he rather liked the system of caste, hierarchical standing. I don't necessarily appreciate that there is a very firm hierarchy, but I do appreciate that there is a role for everyone. And I personally believe in reincarnation to an extent for my own experiences in life. And in that, I think that the only reason anything exists, and especially here on Earth, is to learn from said experiences, and that plays into whichever role someone sits in. Is it specifically not only something for them to learn from in their subjectivity, but also what they have the capacity to act on or towards, and therein aiming for another person's role is not necessarily trying to elevate yourself to something higher or lower. It's just, not meant for you. And in it not being meant for you, it fucks up the entire order of things. It fucks up what the other person is capable of doing and what you are now not capable of doing, but presume you have the ability to do. Peter's principle: you promote yourself to a position of incapacity or incompetence. Such men, with their equality before God, have hitherto swayed the destiny of Europe. Equity, not equality, equity, which is in reference to provide everybody a safe platform to build from. So if they do not have enough in the beginning, build up under them. And if build up under them to the general expected position of what is for everyone. And that gives a starting point to work from. Equity, not equality, because equality would put one in a position of presuming that everything is the same, that we all start from the same position in life, and we fucking don't. Yeah, again, to reference, psychology is fucking handed down genetically. So, I was born more inclined towards suicidal ideation and anxiety. And if you put me in a position right next to someone who did not have that fate, did not genetically inherit those traits, and may actually be mentally healthy in this day and age, rarity. But, just saying that much, and then expecting both of us to perform a task in the exact same manner is asking a fish to climb a tree. The expectations are incorrect. And without equity, without an understanding that you might need a pulley system for the fish to get up the tree, to keep the fish in water, you're being a fucking idiot. So equality before God have hitherto swayed the destiny of Europe, until at last a dwarfed, almost ludicrous species has been produced. A gregarious animal, something obliging, sickly, mediocre, the European of the present day. Yeah. So that is the end of chapter 3. And that's an entire hour, so yeah, you don't need more. That was 1 point. You're welcome. Take care of yourselves, and may your wants align with your needs. Sorry I went without making videos for so long, but I guess here's a really long one for you to have. Okay, bye-bye. Eat well, drink well, sleep well, bye.